All right, let's talk about players in Dynasty that
Mm,
it's likely best you hold on to.
yes,
Okay.
agreed.
These are not guys that you want to trade away yet because their value isn't there. And they're certainly not players that you want to drop. They could be on that edge of, man, do I really want to spend a bench spot on this player?
Agreed.
Well, we're going to tell you why we think you should stash four players today. I'm going to go first. Number one is Irv Smith, the
Brother
tight
Irv.
end out of Minnesota.
Okay.
Let's talk about his career so far. He was drafted in round 2 of the 2019 NFL draft by the Minnesota Vikings. 2019 to 2020, played here and there, wasn't super involved, was kind of getting, brought up, if you will, behind Kyle Rudolph. Had 7 touchdowns, though, in those 2 years. And then in 2021, he had a season-ending injury to his knee. It was a torn meniscus. A lot of people thought that he might have a breakout last year, but his season was ended before it even began. And now Tyler Conklin, who was the tight end one for this team last year, is a New York Jet. He left in
Look it up.
free agency, which leaves Irv Smith as the tight end one unquestionably in this depth chart. They didn't really replace him in the draft. I mean, they spent a 6th-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, on one of these tight ends. So he is unquestionably going to be the tight end one entering the year. And I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel here, okay? Number one, let's talk about his college profile. Let's remember what he did in college. Let's talk about his production. He was a 4-star recruit, was a highly recruited tight end, went to Alabama, was a part of that team, a key part of that team that made the 2019 national championship. He had 44 receptions, 710 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which might not sound impressive, but you have to keep in mind that that 2019 team was stacked. 2018-2019 team. They had Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devonta Smith. I mean, there was a lot of really good options on this team that Irv Smith had to compete with. And now he's in the NFL, and he very much fits that wide receiver tight end hybrid, if you will, that the NFL is starting to become obsessed with. Definitely doesn't have to line up on the line of scrimmage. This is a player that he's very versatile. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up on the outside. He was compared a lot to O.J. Howard coming into the league. And if you remember O.J. Howard before his injuries with Jameis Winston,
he was a guy.
That's, he was a very fantasy relevant tight end, a guy who brought you quite a lot of value.
Agreed.
And I believe he can still be that kind of field stretcher, guy in the slot on the outside type player here for the Vikings. And I would argue that the Vikings kind of need this type of player in their offense. Let's talk next about the expectations that his own team have for him. From the head coach himself, Kevin O'Connell, here's a quote. He says, "Some of the success that Irv's had, both with how we're going to use him and ultimately where he is at in his career, he's ready to absorb it all this year and be in a position to play with a bunch of confidence that he's going to be a major part of what we do." So the team has high expectations for Irv to be, at minimum, the 3rd option in this receiving core, okay, at minimum. And if we look back on Kirk Cousins' career as a whole, he has a tendency to favor tight ends. I mean, this is not out of the norm for Kirk Cousins to favor his tight end if he has a tight end that he feels like he can rely on. I mean, you look at last year, Tyler Conklin, for example. Do any one of us think that Tyler Conklin is a top 12 tight end talent-wise? Do we think he is this, guy that should be relied on? I don't think so, but still, Kirk Cousins targeted him 87 times. And there are now 87 vacated targets in this offense. Last year, that would have been the 12th most targets amongst tight ends, okay? So being, at worst, the 3rd option in an offense, by the way, that scored the 12th most points per game, 13th most points per game last season, I think this could finally be the season where Irv Smith could become what we all have thought that he could become. So if I have Irv Smith, I'm continuing to hold him. I am continually trying to stash him. Now is not the time to sell because his value is nowhere near what it could be. It's definitely not the time to drop him because I do think there's clear opportunity ahead of him. And this really it's a contract year. It's a make or break situation. He's either going to prove himself and get an extension, or he's not going to prove himself and he's going to be a guy you can drop next year. So you can either drop him now or wait and see if he's going to live up to that hype and potentially bring more value to your team here in the future. Irv Smith is a player that I think can develop into being a tight end you can start. Okay. I'm not saying he's top 5. I'm saying he can develop into becoming a tight end that you can start. That's the upside. And by the way, Adam Thielen is 32 years old.
Yeah.
Not getting any younger. So at some point, there could be a crossover here where someone needs to be the second option behind Justin Jefferson. And I don't think Irv Smith is not that option. I'm not saying that he's the favorite, but I don't think he's out of the question there. So Irv Smith is a guy that I'm trying to hold if I have him.
All right. It's going to be very interesting. Irv Smith, my must-hold player, and I'm actually really, really nervous to even say this guy's name, honestly, because I have tried and tried and tried.
You've been burned.
Yeah, and I have been burned tremendously, and that is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, this was my guy last year that I was believing in. I was like, hey, something can happen. Just didn't happen, all right? Career so far, drafted 32nd pick in the 2020 draft. Obviously, in the 2020 season, he finished RB22. He missed 3 games. In the 2021 season, he finished RB47 with missing 7 games. Obviously, I think the question is, can this guy stay healthy now? He's been injured for the past 2 years. You know, he does play in one of the best offenses in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, one of the best offensive mind head coaches in the NFL as well. This is tough, right?
Yeah.
Because he was a first-round pick in one of the best offenses. The expectation was that he was going to go off, you know.
Expectations were through the roof.
Yeah, people like myself, I'm pretty sure Zach, you know, we were saying this guy could be a top 12 for years to come. We were saying we're going to rave about him. He was a first top 5 pick in rookie drafts. He was the guy, right? Just not the case. And then obviously Darrell Williams is here. He takes over. Now he's in Miami.
I think Arizona.
Arizona, excuse me. I literally said Arizona, and I said Miami. Now the Chiefs draft a running back in the 7th round in Isaiah Pacheco. He really shouldn't be a threat moving forward, but they did sign Ronald Jones coming from Tampa Bay, who isn't really a pass-catching back. He's more of, you know, a 1-2 punch type of guy, which in my thought process is that surely Clyde should be the lead pass-catching back here. A third down guy, maybe a second down guy. I don't know if Ronald Jones can really, truly take all the workload from Clyde, but that's also really hard to see because Darrell Williams did that last year. And I think we can both say that maybe Clyde is more talented than Darrell and Ronald Jones. At least that's the expectation. I wonder if the fantasy community would think that as well. So the thought process is that the Chiefs are kind of doing a new thing. They get rid of Tyreek, you know. So that's a big part of their offense, right? Yeah. They get rid of Tyreek, who does little jet sweeps. He can play in the backfield. He does whatever. Now the expectation, which it sounds crazy to say, the expectation is that this team should somewhat struggle, somewhat have growing pains with Sky Moore, you know, Patrick Mahomes. They're going to have to get a rhythm. The really only chemistry that Patrick Mahomes has here is with Travis Kelce and Mecole Hardman, which is kind of hard to really rely on in my eyes. So,
but you can rely on Kelce. That's what I was going to say. I feel like
you can definitely rely on Kelce. And he's going to get hyper targeted, no doubt. But would that lead to more checkdowns? I don't know. Would that lead to more opportunity for, hey, maybe let's give it to the running back, right?
Right.
That's a thought process, right? So let's go back to the history of Clyde. Obviously, I said it before, 2021, finished RB47. If you really expand those 3 games that he played into a whole 17 games, or 16 games, 17 games, he would have finished RB18. Yeah. That's a decent finish for Clyde. You know, he was averaging 11 and a half points per game, 11 carries, and 2.3 targets per game. Obviously, he went down from the year before. So now let's go back to 2020, his rookie season. Finished RB22. If he played all 16 games, he would have finished RB11. RB11. That's pretty good for a rookie, in my opinion, right? He was averaging 4 targets per game, 13 and a half fantasy points, 13 carries, and averaging 13 carries and 4.1 targets per game. That's hope. That's something that we should really look at because we shouldn't forget Because why would you draft a guy in the first round and then no longer use him moving forward? The only reason why Darrell Williams was there in fantasy relevant was because Clyde was injured, right? From week 6 to 10, when Clyde was his biggest chunk from last year, Williams was averaging 5.4 carries per game, over 17 points in fantasy. Why can't Clyde do that? You know, it's because he can't stay healthy. It's because he's just bad. He's actually just a bad running back, and they shouldn't have drafted him. And yes, he should have drafted Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift over them, no doubt about it. Or is Andy Reid not giving him the work?
Right. I mean, you're saying they should have drafted Jonathan Taylor. I'm shaking my head. Yes,
no, I know. Like, they definitely should have. But like, why can't Clyde do it? Is it just because? That's what I'm saying. For all those reasons, like, I don't know if we truly know what the reason is. And we can say he's unhealthy, but when he is healthy, he's he's doing decent. He's playing worthy enough to have him in his starting lineup. Not the expectation where he should have been the RB1. I think he's more of an RB2, mid to low end RB2 now. That's the expectation. But I do believe he could give those RB1 numbers if he has the opportunity. That's what I'm saying. I do believe there's hope. And there's no way anyone's saying, hey, you want Clyde? Yeah, sure. I'll throw you a third. I'll throw you a second. Like, you probably drafted Clyde in the top 3 rounds in a dynasty startup, or in the first 5 picks in your rookie drafts. That's why it's so hard to get rid of Clyde, and I still believe there's hope purely because of Patrick Mahomes, of Andy Reid, and these Chiefs. He's on one of the best offenses. How are they not going to use him? Like, it's so hard to give up hope for Clyde. That's what I'm saying.
I get it.
I'm gonna get stabbed in the back once again for the second 2 years consecutively, I think. But I'm still believing. I think you just need.
If the expectations are much, much, much lower, it's not really a stab in the back anymore. Someone's, maybe it's a thumbtack in your back now. If you have way lower expectations, and I think those expectations are good. I agree in the sentiment that he is someone that you should hold because you're definitely not going to get proper value for him if you sell. And he does have good opportunity ahead of him. I think what I realized with Clyde, and I realized this, I said this last year. Pretty much, I said this last year after the first couple weeks of the season. I'm ready to admit that Clyde is not a dynamic running back.
Right.
He is just not a game-changing talent. However, I don't know if you remember, but I did say what they need to do is bring him back to the role that he played at LSU, which was a pass-catching running back. It wasn't he wasn't getting 20 carries a game at LSU. He was a pass-catching running back, and that was always his special, what he specialized in.
Right.
So now I think with Ronald Jones coming in, hopefully he can be that. So I do have hope in him. And I do think he's someone that you should stash for sure. I mean, he's definitely not worth moving, just have lower expectations. So I'm on board. My next hold is Terrace Marshall. Okay. So let's talk about Terrace Marshall. Massively, massively disappointing rookie season. It was rough. We have to be honest. But he was drafted in round 2 last year by the Carolina Panthers as a rookie, 17 receptions, but he only had 30 targets. Don't know what you can really do with 30 targets, guys. And Panthers shuffled through a lot of quarterbacks last year. Sam Darnold, Cam Newton, PJ Walker. And then that foot injury. I mean, it ended his season, which, my God, it was a rough year. Situation he's in now, I mean, Sam Darnold's probably the quarterback. Maybe it's Matt Corral. We've heard talks about them trading for Jimmy G. I think that's a possibility. Wide receiver 1, DJ Moore. What about the rest of that crew? We'll talk about that in a second. So let me tell you why I think he's worth stashing still. Number 1 is his draft capital and his age. He is 21 years old, going to be 22 years old soon. Terrace Marshall is a younger wide receiver than Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks, and Chris Olave, okay? And he was a second-round draft pick.
Right.
So I do expect the team to give him some more opportunities and to extend his leash, if you will. How about college? What did he do in college? Well, he was pretty good in college. Remember in 2019, he was a third wide receiver on that crazy Joe Burrow LSU team.
Yep.
He was really good. Then 2020, Joe Burrow is gone. And that team at LSU, after Joe Burrow, really struggled to fill his shoes. They had 3 different quarterbacks. I mean, Miles Brennan was the quarterback 1, if you will, and he threw about 1,100 yards. Now, Terrace was the wide receiver 1. And in 7 games, he only played 7 games. He put up 48 catches for 730 yards and 10 touchdowns. Had a dominator rating that year of 32.5%, despite missing 3 games. As a prospect, we really liked him.
Yeah, we did.
Ideal body,
100%.
6'2", 205 pounds. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to work out midseason, but I still think he is an ideal size for, an X or a Y wide receiver in the NFL. So let's talk about some upcoming opportunities and maybe some quarterback changes. Let's look at the wide receiver depth. I said we would talk about this, okay? Obviously, you got DJ Moore as your wide receiver 1.
Correct.
So he currently needs to beat out Robbie Anderson and Rashard Higgins for the wide receiver 2 or 3 spot, if you will. Let's talk about Robbie Anderson, because I see a lot of reports that he might be the wide receiver 2. But have we all forgotten how atrociously terrible he was last year? I'm going to remind you how god-awful Robbie Anderson was. He was like the one exception of, hey, targets don't lead to points. He was the one exception there of like, this guy's getting targets, but it's not leading to fantasy relevancy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at this last year, okay? Last year, Robbie Anderson had more targets than T. Higgins, Tyler Lockett, A.J. Brown. Keep in mind, Tyler Lockett with Russell Wilson, Devonta Smith, the wide receiver 1 on his team, Christian Kirk, Chase Claypool. Yet he finished more than 10 spots lower than every single one of those players.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was bad.
Robbie Anderson caught 48% of his passes. This is historically bad efficiency. I don't think we truly remember how terrible Robbie Anderson was last year. And Rashard Higgins has never really made an impact. He's on a 1-year deal.
Yep.
So to me, if I look at this crew of wide receivers, it makes more sense, in my opinion, for Terrace Marshall to be the complementary piece that this team builds around DJ Moore. You just signed DJ Moore to an extension. Robbie Anderson doesn't have much on his deal. Neither does Rashard Higgins. And you just drafted this guy last year in the 2nd round. It feels like Terrace Marshall should be given opportunities this year, should be given an opportunity to prove the talent, the reason that they, bet on him last year in the draft. So for me, I don't think the depth chart is all that scary outside of DJ Moore. I think he should get opportunities, and I still like him as a talent. So he's someone that I do think you need to be stashing on our teams. Don't drop Terrace Marshall just yet, because I've seen around the Twitter sphere, a lot of people are saying, drop him now. And look, I understand, because in a year from now, maybe you do drop him. Yeah. But it's just not worth it right now. Mm-hmm. It's just not worth dropping a guy who was drafted in the 2nd round yet.
Yeah, I agree. We really like Terrace Marshall coming in, like we said, so it's going to be very, very interesting. My last must-hold player, and this is more of like a long play in my opinion, but it's Donovan Peoples-Jones, okay? And he was drafted in the 2020 draft. He was a 6th-round pick. He's only 23 years old. He was a 5-star recruit out of high school. He didn't do much in college. It was a struggle. He kind of struggled because that offense was struggling. But obviously, he's going into I would say one of the best situations he's ever been a part of now.
Sure.
Right? Okay. Obviously, the expectation with Deshaun Watson, if he plays, if he doesn't play, let's just put that aside, right?
Yeah.
He is finally the second option on this offense if he does beat out David Bell. He should be the second option. David Bell needs to fight for his spot, right? That's the thought process. He was behind OBJ, Jarvis, and Higgins. All 3 of those guys are gone now, and DPJ is going to be stepping up to the plate and saying, hey, I am the true wide receiver 2 on this team behind Amari Cooper. Trust in me, right? So the biggest question, like I said, is Donovan Peoples-Jones going to play with Deshaun Watson? We don't know. That's either going to be Baker Mayfield, Jacoby Brissett. Either way, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play this year, Donovan Peoples-Jones has another year, right, on his contract. And that's the expectation, is that Deshaun Watson is going to come and he could bring fantasy relevance to Donovan Peoples-Jones. Yeah. Outside of that, the expectation for him is to, maybe finish in the top 35 of wide receivers. Let's establish some consistency for Donovan Peoples-Jones in this year, whether that is, once again, with Baker, Watson, or with Jacoby Brissett moving forward. Yeah. He finished 3rd in yards per catch, which I believe is absolutely fantastic. Those times when Baker Mayfield was throwing it down the field and just lobbing it, closing his eyes? Most of the time you were hoping that it was OBJ or Jarvis Landry, because those are the people that you had on your fantasy team. But it was Donovan Peoples-Jones, right? Yeah. He was the guy. Who loves to lob the ball down the field is Deshaun Watson. He could be the Will Fuller to Deshaun Watson. Do you get what I'm saying? He could be that guy, right? Yeah. There's a chance in a year or two, maybe at the end of this year, in the beginning of the next year, in 2023 year.
Yeah.
And we've seen a glimpse, just a little glimpse, just 2-week glimpse, where Donovan Peoples-Jones has finished as a top 12 wide receiver when Jarvis Landry was hurt, right? Weeks 5 to 6, he finished as a top 12 wide receiver, right? And in one of those weeks, he was the wide receiver 5. Mm-hmm. Once again, as a really small glimpse, maybe some hope there for you guys to really take that upon and say, you know what, Donovan Peoples-Jones has been on my bench for a while.
Yeah.
You're probably right now contemplating, maybe you need to drop him for a rookie. Maybe you need to. But if there's somebody else that you can drop, there's hope for Donovan Peoples-Jones, in my opinion.
Sure.
Give him another year or two. He's going up in the depth charts. Finally, it was really hard for him to come up. You know what I mean? OBJ, Jarvis Landry, these brothers that were on the team, I'm pretty sure they definitely control that wide receiver room. Now they're gone.
Yeah.
Opportunity, brand new wide receiver room. Donovan Peoples-Jones, give him another year.
Yeah, I like DPJ. I actually think David Bell's going to be the second wide receiver, though.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, he was drafted higher than DPJ, and he is with the current, coaching staff organization that drafted him. So I don't know. I think DPJ. I think he can be the wide receiver 3 on the team. Have you heard the reports that OBJ might come back to Cleveland?
I did. I literally saw that this morning, and I was like, damn, I'm still rocking with it, though.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say. If Will Fuller doesn't come in, if OBJ doesn't come in, there could be real good value with DPJ. If Watson plays. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely worth holding because of the talent.
No doubt about it. So,
man, Cleveland is in such a weird situation right now.
It sucks for them. I mean, you were happy, and then you're like, oh, shit. We have a great quarterback, but is he really going to play?
Yeah.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. Anyway, guys, huge love. Comment down below. Let us know what you think of these holds. I hope that they were helpful.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos.
Watch it.
You can also subscribe.
Right now.
If you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/Fantasyland Fam.